If you look up any YouTube video about vintage lenses, you will no doubt see information about this lens. It's small, cheap, coming around £25, and it's fast. And oh, I might want to mention that it is a Soviet. Today we are talking about the wonderful Helios 44, the 58mm f2 lens produced by KMZ, MMZ and Jupiter between the years of 1958 until 1999. Because of this 41-year manufacturing period, the Helios 44 is considered to be one of the most mass-produced lenses in the world. But to truly understand the history of the Helios 44 too, let's get back in time. 1945. The end of the bloodiest human conflict in human history, World War II. As a result of the Yalta Conference and the Allies' reorganization of Europe, the Soviet Union occupies East Germany, and with that occupies many Carl Zeiss factories. Within those factories are many blueprints for lenses, and one of those lenses just so happens to be the Carl Zeiss Biotar f2. As a result of these beautifully German-engineered blueprints being found, the Soviets decided to mass-produce the lenses for their own people. First released as the Zenit Biotar Krasnogorski, but was later rebranded as the Helios 44. Helios 44 lenses usually operate under the naming scheme of Helios 44 XY, where X equals the lens mount that the lens is for. So M stands for M42 and K stands for Pentax K mount. And Y is the optical resolution of the lens. So the higher the number, the better the optical resolution. That number goes from 2 all the way up to 7, 7 being the best. Before I said usually this is the naming scheme, because mine only has 44-2, it doesn't have the mount of the lens at all on it, other than, you know, the actual mount itself. So just take that as like a precaution, but it will, obviously the seller will say which one it is, M42 for screw, and yeah. So you might be saying, Tommy, the naming scheme and the history of the lens, that's great, but I want to see how this lens performs in photos, and I will show you in a minute. I just want to go through the technical specs of the lens itself first. With a focal length of 58mm, this lens is usually placed in the territory of a nifty 50, as this 8mm won't make a massive difference in reality. However, there is a slightly more narrow field of view as you would expect. The maximum aperture of the lens is f2, and the minimum aperture is f16 on the model I have. However, some later models are meant to have f22. The minimum focusing distance is 0.5 meters, and speaking of focusing, the lens being the age it is completely manual and will need to be adapted to your camera. You can see it here being adapted to my Sony a7R II. The M42 mount is a well adapted lens mount and will pretty much work with all lens mounts as long as you have the correct adapter. Now I'm going to talk about the photo this little guy produces, and if there was one word I would use to describe it, it's swirly. The bokeh this lens produces is basically godlike and very swirly, creates a dreamlike ring around the subject, simply stunning. The images are sharp and the colour the lens produces is just amazing, and for the price you simply won't find anything like it. Now onto video, and I must admit I am using the Sony a7R II here, compared to a different camera I've been using for the rest of the video. So if the colours are different, then that will be why. The lens is at f2 here, and the bokeh does look very good, as I do stand out from the background. However, due to the size of my room, I can't really take advantage of the bokeh this lens produces, because of the 58mm focal length. The camera is basically the other end of the room, so if you have a smaller room, that might be something to think about. The footage is sharp, and the lens has done very well with the many colours in the frame. So in summary, I think I've made my point extremely clear at this point, that I really love this lens. It's £25, it's really cheap, it's just such a good lens to go with any camera. I do love it on the Panasonic GH1 for portraits. It does make a very weird 116mm-ish without a focal reducer. Obviously, if you do have a focal reducer, then it will become a little bit less. But it's a really good combination, and you wouldn't think it would, but the GH1's just that good of a camera, to be fair. And yeah, so well, I don't know what else I need to say at this point. It's a cult classic for a reason. It's well loved, and there's a good reason for it. It's a good lens.